I spent half my life keeping a company afloat only to watch my parents sign it away to my brother, who hadn't stepped foot in the factory in years. Back then, I still believed in loyalty, in hard work, in something called family. But that belief died the day I read the ownership papers. My name is Allison Graves. I'm the oldest child in a Midwestern family that owns a third-generation canned foods company. Nothing fancy, just green beans, corn, tomatoes. We supplied grocery chains and diners all across the state. It was the kind of business that kept its head down and its lights on. And I kept it running. I started working at the factory the summer I turned 17. While my friends spent their break tanning by the lake or chasing internships in the city, I was elbow-deep in inventory reports, learning how to fix a jammed conveyor belt, and watching over late-night shipments like they were infants. I didn't complain, not once. I thought it meant something to show up for the family, to carry a name forward. My parents never pushed my younger brother Luke the same way. He was the dreamer, that's what they called him. He studied film in California, rarely came home, and treated the business like some background noise to his real life. I used to think it didn't bother me. I told myself we each had our roles, that I didn't need recognition, as long as I had purpose. For over a decade, I helped that company survive industry shifts, supply chain crises, and a recession. I renegotiated contracts, cut dead weight, and modernized our operations without ever asking for a raise, or even a thank you. I wasn't chasing money. I thought I was building something that would eventually, maybe quietly, become mine. A legacy passed down not by words, but by effort. And for the longest time, that belief kept me moving. Until it didn't. While Luke was off in LA chasing film credits that never quite materialized, I became the one who caught every falling piece. After college business school, local, affordable, I didn't even consider applying anywhere else. I went straight back to the factory floor. My friends thought I was insane. You've got a degree. Why are you choosing a tin can over a corner office? Because someone had to. The company was flailing after a bad expansion attempt the year before. Dad had invested in new machinery we couldn't afford and hired a team of consultants who bled us dry. Layoffs followed. Morale was rock bottom. Vendors started pulling out. Customers drifted. That's when I stepped in quietly. Without a title, without permission, I renegotiated contracts with our corn suppliers in Iowa and convinced our largest distributor to give us 3 more months. I rebuilt our logistics schedule from scratch, and I did it all while still clocking into a job officially labeled operations assistant. I became the unspoken heart of the company. When a storm knocked out power across the region, I slept in my office for 2 nights to make sure our perishables didn't go bad. When one of our longtime managers had a breakdown on the production line, I covered her shift and sent her home with 2 weeks of paid leave out of my own pocket. My parents said they were grateful, but they never changed my title, never bumped my pay, and never even brought me into executive meetings. "You're young," they said. "It's too early." That was the line for everything. Too early to promote me. Too early to add me to the ownership discussions. Too early to let me carry the company officially. But it was never too early to let me carry the weight. And so, I did. Through supplier bankruptcies. Through product recalls. Through 2 years where we almost didn't meet payroll. And I quietly deferred my own salary so the rest of the staff could be paid. People stayed because I stayed. Clients stayed because I showed up at their offices with hand-signed letters and reassurances. Month after month. Luke called once a year. Maybe on holidays. He'd ask how the bean biz was doing and make some joke about starting a documentary on small-town capitalism. One Christmas, he showed up with a new girlfriend and asked me if we still made that creamed corn thing. He hadn't been inside the factory in 6 years. Still, I defended him. To my parents. To the team, I said he had his own path. That it wasn't fair to compare us. But somewhere deep inside, I believed that what I was doing would matter. That even if nobody said it, they knew who had saved this place. That when the time came, I'd be there not just in spirit, but on paper, in the will, on the board, as more than a name on the employee roster. It wasn't vanity. It was justice. It was the quiet, burning expectation that effort would earn trust. That 10,000 small sacrifices would eventually become irrefutable. I never asked for credit. I asked for legacy. And that, I would later learn, was already promised to someone else. It started with the little things. Not enough to call out. Not enough to scream betrayal, just enough to make me pause. Like when my father stopped CCing me on emails with our attorney. I brushed it off at first. He was old school. He liked phone calls and face-to-face meetings. But when I asked about a zoning issue in one of our warehouses, he waved me off with a casual, Don't worry about that. It's being handled. Or when Mom started referring to the company in a way that made me feel peripheral. Your father and I have been thinking about the future, she'd say over dinner. We might want to bring in some new leadership soon. I assumed she meant me, who else? But she never said it directly. Never looked me in the eye when she said leadership. Then there was the time I found a draft proposal printed and forgotten on the copier that outlined potential restructuring options for executive roles. The only names listed were my parents. And Luke. I wasn't even a footnote. I laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny, but because it felt so absurd. Luke, the guy who thought our inventory system still ran on paper logs. The guy who didn't know the difference between gross margin and net profit. I mentioned it to my dad half joking, hoping for reassurance. He didn't laugh. He said, Luke has ideas. He sees things from a distance, which gives him perspective. Perspective. From what? A rooftop bar in West Hollywood. Still, I bit my tongue. I always did, because I thought maybe they were just preparing for succession, playing out scenarios. I didn't want to come off as insecure or paranoid. I'd worked too hard to start sounding like I needed validation. But then came the design meeting. We were working on a new label for our organic line, a project I'd led from day one. I'd met with farmers, ran product tests, even sat in focus groups with single moms and dietitians. When the label was nearly finalized, my mom brought in a branding consultant from New York. She introduced him as someone Luke had recommended. Suddenly, everything I'd built was up for revision. The font wasn't modern enough. The colors were too traditional. The tagline, Real Food, Real Roots, was labeled uninspired. I asked my mother why we were overhauling something that had already tested well. She smiled, too gently, and said, We just want to make sure Luke feels included. He's part of this too. That was the first time I felt something harden in my chest. Not quite anger. Not yet. But something colder than confusion. I began noticing more. The company Christmas card listed Luke as creative advisor, even though no one had ever seen him in the building. My dad started scheduling meetings without telling me. They'd come back with decisions already made, directions already set. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was just tired, that maybe they were trying to bring Luke closer, to make up for lost time. Maybe I should be happy. Families should stick together. Right, but even then, I knew on some gut-deep level I couldn't silence that I was being moved aside. Not abruptly, not cruelly, just quietly and silence. I would learn is the most efficient tool for betrayal. I found out by accident. That's the part that still stings the most. It was a Tuesday. I remember because we'd just wrapped up a quarterly vendor review, and I was compiling updates for the accountant. I walked into Dad's office to grab the latest ownership file, one I'd reviewed every quarter for years. It was always in the same cabinet, same drawer, except this time. There was a different folder on top. Red tab, new label, transfer documents, Graves Holdings. Curious. I pulled it out. The first few pages looked standard boilerplate corporate paperwork. But then I saw Luke's name, over and over again, listed as managing partner, then majority shareholder, then chief executive officer. I flipped faster, pulse spiking, hand shaking just enough to blur the words. The final page stopped me cold. It was a signed agreement, dated 3 months earlier. The entire company assets, intellectual property, branding, operations transferred to Luke Graves. No mention of me, no carve-out, no clause that said I retained anything. Just gone. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. I even laughed out loud, a dry little choke of disbelief. Then I sat down, right there on the floor of my father's office. I reread every page. I read the signature lines, my dad's, my mom's, Luke's, not mine. I felt a heat rise behind my eyes, something between fury and humiliation, but I forced myself to breathe. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe they were doing legal restructuring. Maybe my portion was outlined in another file. Maybe God, please, this was incomplete. But when I asked our accountant discreetly, calmly, like someone just updating internal records, he looked surprised. Oh, didn't they tell you? He said, tapping his keyboard. Yeah, the transfer finalized last quarter. Luke's technically the owner now. We're just cleaning up a few tax implications. Didn't they tell me? No, they didn't. The people I had worked for, sacrificed for, defended at every turn, hadn't told me a damn thing. That night, I drove home in silence. Not a dramatic, stormy silence, just empty. I poured a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the wall until the sun came up. I thought about the nights I stayed late to fix broken equipment, About the weekends I skipped vacations to finish audits, about the employees who cried in my office during layoffs, and how I held their hands and promised we'd do better next time. And I thought about Luke, the golden boy with a casual smile and no history in this place. The boy who became the man they handed my life's work to like it was a family heirloom I had merely polished for him. They didn't fire me. They didn't even confront me. They erased me softly, politely, without noise. That made it worse. At least betrayal with teeth would have left wounds. This just left rot. I didn't cry. Not then. I sat with the realization like someone waiting for a train that never came. Something had ended. But no one had the decency to tell me. And that was the moment not when I found out, but when I realized no one thought I needed to be told that something inside me shifted. The belief I'd carried for years that hard work earned trust, that loyalty was rewarded, that family meant something died before sunrise. And in its place, something else began to take root. I didn't confront them, not right away, not even later. That surprises people when I tell the story. They expect fireworks, tears, shouting, some big dinner table explosion. But I wasn't interested in scenes. I'd spent too long holding things together to become the reason they finally fell apart. So I played along. For a little while. I still showed up every morning, still reviewed the shipments, still signed off on payroll. No one suspected a thing. I didn't tell my coworkers, didn't ask questions, didn't even mention the folder. I just observed, and with every passing day, I noticed more signs that I no longer belonged. Luke started calling in for meetings I hadn't been invited to. My father began introducing him on phone calls as the new vision for Graves Holdings. My name faded from internal memos, from supplier communications, from the company's digital infrastructure. When the annual strategy deck was circulated and I saw Luke listed as founder and CEO on the cover, I knew it was time. I drafted a resignation email that took me 2 hours to write and 10 seconds to send. No drama, no emotion, just 2 lines, effective immediately. I'm stepping away from all operational involvement with Graves Holdings. I wish the company continued success. No one responded for a full day. When my mother finally called, it wasn't to ask why. It was to ask if I could stick around just a little longer to help Luke get settled. I said no, kindly, finally, and then I let go. No farewell post on LinkedIn, no farewell lunch. I packed my things in 2 cardboard boxes and left before anyone else arrived the next morning. I didn't want goodbyes. I wanted a clean line between the version of me who believed in duty and the version who'd finally had enough. For the first time in 15 years, I had no title, no plan. No reason to check my email every 10 minutes. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, terrifying, but also kind of weightless. That weekend, I went for a walk without my phone. I bought vegetables at the farmer's market and didn't calculate margins in my head. I took a deep breath and realized how long it had been since I'd taken one. And somewhere, in that quiet, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't known I was missing. Possibility. I gave myself 2 weeks to do nothing, and then I got to work. Starting over wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't a movie scene with music swelling and a montage of coffee-fueled nights. It was quiet, awkward, lonely. At first, I didn't even know what I was building yet. I just knew I couldn't sit still and let them write the rest of my story without a footnote. So I made a list. What do I know? What do I care about? What do I never want to feel again? The answers came slowly. I knew food manufacturing inside out. I cared about transparency, about people knowing what was in their food, where it came from, who handled it. And I never, ever wanted to feel powerless again. That was enough to start with. I took the last of my savings, carefully accumulated over years of deferred raises and bonusless quarters, and rented a tiny industrial space on the outskirts of town. Just 1 room, no equipment yet, no staff, just possibility and stubbornness. Next, I made calls, not to investors, not yet, but to people I'd worked with for years, vendors, logistics managers, retired consultants. I asked questions, I listened. I told them I was thinking of starting something small, something clean, something built for the next generation of consumers. To my surprise, they didn't just listen, they leaned in. Turns out, a lot of people had grown tired of the way the old systems worked. They were tired of cutting corners, of pretending the supply chain was cleaner than it really was. They were tired of my brother's vision decks and my parents' endless attempts to modernize without understanding what that meant. One of my oldest contacts, an organic farm co-op in northern Wisconsin, offered to let me pilot a test run using their surplus tomatoes. No contracts, Just trust another. A packaging vendor I once saved from losing a major account gave me 90-day terms on a custom biodegradable line. Piece by piece, it began to take shape. I called it Bright Root Foods, not after me, not after my family, but after what I wanted the company to stand for: clarity, sustainability, and something grounded. I designed the first product myself: organic, fire-roasted tomato soup in glass jars with hand-labeled tags. I packaged the first 500 units in that little rented space, with the help of 2 part-time hires from a local culinary school. We didn't even have a website. I sold the first batch at farmers markets and local co-ops. It sold out in a weekend. People weren't just buying food. They were buying the story, the values, the authenticity. I wasn't pushing a product. I was building a relationship. That's when I knew. This wasn't just therapy. This was a business. My business. No borrowed legacy. No handed-down keys. Just mine. The first 3 months nearly broke me. People think momentum is the hardest part of starting a business. But they're wrong. It's what comes after the first taste of success that tests you, the part where excitement fades and the grind begins. After the farmers markets and co-op shelves emptied that first run of Bright Root jars, I thought I had something. I thought we'd struck a nerve. But momentum isn't magic, it's logistics. I still had no formal production facility, no distribution plan, no marketing budget, and the money from the first run barely covered restocking costs. Cash flow became my god. I checked spreadsheets at 2A. Recalculated packaging quotes while standing in line for coffee, and ran ROI scenarios on my phone during lunch. There were weeks I had to choose between ordering more labels or paying my part-time hires on time. I always chose the people, more than once. I sat in my car after a supplier meeting and asked myself, what am I doing? I could have taken a job, a safe one. Regional manager at a national brand, supply chain director. I had offers, but I didn't want to build someone else's vision, not after what I just lived through. Still, belief didn't pay invoices, and there were days when I was just so damn tired. Physically, yes, but more than that, spiritually, because no matter how much progress I made, there was this voice in my head I couldn't silence. They were supposed to believe in you first, and they didn't. That voice didn't sound angry, it sounded disappointed, like some part of me still needed their approval. Even after everything, I hated that. I hated that I could build something from scratch and still wonder whether I was proving them wrong or just trying to earn something that was never offered. There was also the comparison trap. Every time Luke posted a sleek corporate update on LinkedIn New Board Advisor, new investor pitch, I'd feel a flicker of insecurity. His company was bigger, glossier, backed by family money and contacts I used to manage. They looked like a real business. I looked like a cottage experiment run by a woman with stubborn ideals in a rented space. But then I'd talk to customers, real people. One mom who sent an email thanking us for making soup her allergic son could finally eat. A grocer who said Bright Root products were the only ones customers ask about by name. A chef who told me he served our lentil stew in his bistro because it tastes like someone gave a damn. And just like that, I remembered why I started. It wasn't to beat them. Not really. It was to build something that couldn't be taken from me. Something built not on inheritance, but on intent. Something I could look at even on the hardest days and say, this is mine. Every flawed, fragile, beautiful part of it. 6 months into building Bright Root, something changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. It started with a single phone call. A regional grocery buyer had seen our jars at a weekend farmer's market. My daughter picked it up. She said the label looked like someone actually cared. That call led to a meeting. The meeting led to a pilot program, 10 stores. 1 state. 2 weeks. I didn't have logistics support. No distributor. No sales team. Just me. A rented van and 2 folding tables I dragged from one store to the next. Hand-assembling displays with chalkboard signs and empty soup jars turned into mini vases. Scrappy didn't begin to cover it. And yet it worked. By the end of the 2-week trial, every location reordered. Not just restocking, doubling their orders. Customers were calling stores asking when the pretty tomato jars would be back. That was the first time I felt the shift. The thing I had built quietly, stubbornly, was moving under its own weight. I added 2 new soups, lentil turmeric and roasted carrot ginger. Both developed in my tiny home kitchen, both tested with regulars at the weekend market before going into production. I updated the labels but kept the same tone, plain language. No marketing fluff, just a list of ingredients and a line that read, food with nothing to hide. Orders kept coming, not in floods but in consistent, measured waves. By month 7, We were in 40 stores. By month 9, 70. I hired a second production assistant, then a third. We moved into a slightly bigger space with real ventilation and a walk-in cooler. It still wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Then the press found us. First a local food blog, then a piece in a sustainable business journal. One day, someone tagged me on Instagram. Brightroot had been mentioned on a podcast about women-led startups. I listened to the episode 3 times. They called our product shockingly honest. I posted the quote on our bulletin board and didn't say a word. My team smiled when they saw it. We all knew what it meant. There were challenges. Still, machines broke. A freezer gave out during a heat wave and cost us an entire week's batch. My margins were thin, and I still skipped paychecks some months so everyone else could cash theirs. But I started to feel something I hadn't in years. Forward motion. And it wasn't just external. Inside me, something was settling, realigning. I no longer felt like I had to check what Luke's company was doing. I stopped comparing our websites. Our reach, our aesthetics. What they had was glossy and big. What I had was real. One night, I stayed late alone, reviewing a new co-packing proposal. I looked around our small facility, still cluttered, still underlit, and realized I loved this mess. Every box, every scuffed surface, every handwritten checklist taped to the wall. It was proof of resilience, of ownership, of movement. This wasn't a rebound project. It was becoming a company, my company. I wasn't watching them. Not really. After I left, I'd muted every update, unsubscribed from their newsletters, even blocked the company's LinkedIn page so I wouldn't see Luke's glowing posts about next-gen leadership and legacy-driven disruption. But some things find you whether you're looking or not. The first sign came from a supplier I hadn't spoken to in months. He called to ask if I knew why Graves Holdings was canceling a standing order. They told us they're switching to a cheaper source in Mexico, he said. But we've worked with your family for 3 decades. Just seems off. I didn't say much, just listened, took a note. Then an old coworker texted me out of the blue. Did you hear about the recall? Corn line contaminated. They're scrambling. I looked it up. Quiet press release. No official statement. But buried in the comments of a local business blog were angry customers. One woman said her son got sick. Another said she'd filed a complaint and never heard back. More messages followed. A mid-level manager I used to supervise reached out on a Sunday night, asking if I had any job openings. Things are unstable, she wrote. No one knows who's actually in charge anymore. And then came the article. Small publication, local audience, but damning headline. Family owned no more. Graves Holdings under fire for outsourcing, mismanagement, and quiet layoffs. It detailed changes in sourcing, leadership turnover, a failed product launch. Customers were noticing the difference, quality slipping, recipes changing, communication going dark. The final quote in the piece hit me like a switchblade. It feels like they're trying to pretend there's something they're not, said a longtime client who requested anonymity. The old company cared. This one just markets well. I stared at that sentence for a long time. It wasn't schadenfreude. I didn't feel giddy or vindicated. What I felt was something colder, quieter, like watching a machine break down after you'd warned it needed oil. I had carried that business for years, propped it up when no one else saw the cracks. And now, without me, those cracks weren't just visible, they were splitting the foundation. Still, I stayed silent. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I didn't gloat. But I did take notes. Because one thing I knew from experience, when a company starts to bleed trust, it rarely survives the hemorrhage. And they were bleeding fast. Meanwhile, Brightroot hit a new milestone. 200 stores. We signed our first co-packing deal and landed a trial with a small regional chain in 3 states. Our customer retention rate crossed 80%. We were lean, ethical, and most importantly, trusted. That's when the second wave of calls started. Not from customers, from people I hadn't heard from in over a year. Luke, then my mother, then both. The first call came from Luke. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was overly casual, but I could hear the strain just beneath it. Hey, Allison. Been a while. Just wanted to, touch base. Thought maybe we could grab coffee sometime, talk shop a little. Talk shop. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. The last time we'd been in the same room. He was giving a speech to the Graves Holdings board about transformative vision while I packed my things in silence. The next day, my mother called. Allison. Honey, I hope you're doing well. We're going through some changes right now. Your brother's doing his best. But the timing's been rough. We thought maybe you could stop by. Just to Advise informally. I didn't reply, not out of spite. I just wasn't ready. Not yet. Then came the email subject line. We need to talk. It was from my father. It was short, direct, no fluff, no emotion. The company is struggling. We miscalculated. If you're willing, I'd like to meet and discuss options. You have more insight into this business than anyone else. Luke agrees. I stared at the message for a full minute. Not because I was shocked, but because it was the first time my father had acknowledged, in writing, that I had value. I didn't respond right away. I let them sit with the silence for a few days. Then I agreed to meet. One condition, neutral ground. A small cafe downtown. No offices, no family homes, no power dynamics. They showed up together, my parents and Luke, all looking slightly older than I remembered. Less confident, more worn. My father opened with what sounded like a rehearsed line. We may have underestimated the complexity of certain transitions. I said nothing. My mother jumped in. We know you have your own company now, and we respect that, but we're in a difficult position. The board's nervous. The suppliers are pulling back. And frankly, no one trusts our leadership anymore. Luke, to his credit, didn't pretend. I'm not you, he said. I thought I could steer this, but I've been in over my head for months. We need help. I let the silence hang for a moment before answering. Then I asked a simple question. Why now? They hesitated. Then my dad said it. Because you're the only one who ever knew how to run it right. That sentence should have felt validating. Maybe a year earlier. It would have, but now, sitting across from them, I realized something. I didn't need their recognition anymore. Still, I listened as they made their offer. A consultant role, full authority over operations, a guaranteed seat on the board. Competitive equity? The words sounded generous on paper, but every syllable was soaked in desperation. They weren't offering respect. They were offering control, re-gifted back to the person who'd already proven they didn't need it. When they finished talking, I thanked them for the meeting, told them I was proud of what I'd built, that I hoped they'd find a path forward. But I also told them something else, something clear. Final. You didn't lose the company because I left. You lost it because you thought I didn't matter. And now, I don't need to come back to matter again. They didn't stop at the cafe. Over the next few weeks, the messages came steadily. First from Luke longer this time, raw and more honest than I'd ever seen him. You were right. I wasn't ready. I thought I could fake it till I figured it out. But the truth is, I never figured it out. You always made it look easy. I see now that it wasn't. Then from my mother, trying to reframe things gently. We didn't mean to hurt you, sweetheart. We just thought Luke needed more support. And you were so capable we thought you'd be fine on your own. And finally, my father, short, no flourishes. Just, we failed to recognize what was in front of us. If there's any chance you'd consider coming back, the company and your family need you. Once upon a time, those words might have broken me open. I might have clung to them like a lifeline, thinking, finally, they see me. But now, they didn't land the same way, because I had already seen myself. Brightroot wasn't just profitable. It was thriving. Our team had grown to 15. We had a production partner. A PR firm had offered to help with national rollout. We were featured in a sustainability segment on local TV, and customers weren't just buying, they were following, sharing, recommending, believing. Still, I took time before replying, because somewhere in me, there was still that quiet, persistent echo. What if you're walking away from reconciliation, from a healed family, from what was always meant to be yours? But another voice, the one I'd spent the last year learning to trust, answered calmly, you're not walking away from healing. You're choosing not to bleed for it. So I wrote one final email. I thanked them for reaching out. I acknowledged that I understood their position even if I didn't agree with how it unfolded. I told Luke I hoped he would find clarity, and that being handed something doesn't make it yours until you earn it. Then I wrote, I didn't build Brightroot to compete with Graves Holdings. I built it because I couldn't survive in a space where my worth was invisible. Now that I've built something real, something rooted in who I am, I can't go back to asking for a seat at a table I was never meant to sit at. I paused before hitting send. Reread the message 3 times, then clicked. There was no burst of adrenaline, no movie-ending swell of music, just a quiet release, like finishing a sentence that had taken years to write. And that was enough. They didn't reply again. I think, deep down, they knew that door was closed, not slammed, not locked, just respectfully shut. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel left out. I felt free. Brightroot turned 2 this spring. We marked the anniversary with a modest celebration, just our team, some home-cooked meals, and a corkboard where everyone pinned one word that described what this place meant to them. Mine was home, not the kind you're born into, the kind you build. With intent, with mistakes, with people who choose to show up, not out of obligation, but belief. Sometimes I still pass by the old Graves Holdings factory. The lights are on less frequently now. The parking lot sits half empty. They're still in business for now, but the soul of it is gone. And I no longer feel anger when I see it, just distance, like an old photograph you stopped reaching for. I didn't burn it down. I just outgrew it. These days, I wake up without dread. I work with people I respect, making products I believe in. I get emails from customers who remember their grandparents when they taste our tomato soup. I see my team take ownership of every step, and I know we're not just surviving, we're thriving. And I'm not waiting for someone to hand me recognition. I don't need my name on a brass plaque or a formal apology. I have shelves lined with jars we made with our hands, and that's more legacy than any inheritance could offer. If you ask me what I learned from all of this, I'd say sometimes the greatest gift betrayal gives you is clarity. Not about them, but about yourself. Who you are when no one's clapping. Who you become when no one's watching. And what you're willing to build when no one's willing to give.